Coming to you from the Tar Heel State, this is the Carolina Commercial Real Estate Connection, bringing you industry insights and hot takes from Carolina real estate experts, helping you begin, grow, and scale your commercial real estate portfolio. And now your hosts, Tony Johnson and Cameron Pearson.
Today we have Thomas Taft on our episode. Thomas will go over affordable housing development. He has developed thousands of units across the southeastern United States, going up and down. He started in Jacksonville and Fayetteville, North Carolina, and has grown and expanded from there. Is very insightful, has built up a big team and multiple companies under his belt. So it's a pleasure to have him on the show, and hopefully you get to learn some insight from him on how to get involved in affordable housing. Thanks for joining us at Carolina Commercial Real Estate Connection. Today we have Thomas Taft on, and Thomas, thanks so much for joining us. Can you give us a little background on yourself and your real estate experience?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Tony and Cameron. A pleasure to be on here. Excited to learn some from you guys and be able to share in my relatively short tenure in this commercial real estate world. So I started coming right out of the Great Recession. I started about 2008 when we were fortunate enough as a family company to have a good lending relationship with one of the few banks to sort of emerge from the financial crisis unscathed, and we were building mostly military-centric housing, multifamily housing in places like Jacksonville, North Carolina, Fayetteville, and a couple of places in Georgia. And so I came in out of college. I went to school for history and English. I thought I was going to law school. Not only did I not care to go to any more school, it was all I could do to get out of undergrad. So I was ready to get out and find a way to make some money and make an impact as quickly as possible. And again, fortunately, at the time, our office was kind of building up its multifamily presence. So I moved down to Jacksonville, North Carolina, during the height of the troop surge in Afghanistan and Iraq, when the Marine Corps was really growing at a rapid pace. There was a lot of deployments and a big need for housing, as they had shifted the regulations for who was allowed to live off a base. So we capitalized on that. And I basically did anything, man. I started off on the construction side. And when I say construction, I really mean picking up trash. And I eventually moved up to the official guy putting on electronic deadbolts on all the doors. And really enjoyed that. Learned a lot about the process from the ground up, which I think is a critical part of growing in any industry, certainly not just real estate, but you really got to see things from the bottom up in order to understand a company from the top down, right? So after that, I moved over to the operations side. We got stuff built. I was able to move to the management and operations side, did everything there from maintenance, of which I was not very good at, to leasing, which I eventually got good at, but it was not something that necessarily came naturally. You really got to spend a good amount of time honing that sales skill, which is not something that was just inherent in my demeanor. And went all the way up to assistant property manager on a property, then moved back to Greenville and really got things rolling there. And this was probably 2012. We decided to shift gears from building in the more tertiary markets like, again, Jacksonville, Greenville, Morehead City, to focusing on the 85 Crescent, which, as you know, and probably a lot of your listeners as well know, kind of stretches from, Richmond, maybe even the DC area, all the way to Birmingham, Alabama. So our focus has been primarily in Richmond, Raleigh, Durham, the Triad, Charlotte, and Greenville, South Carolina. And since we made that transition, we've probably built about 2,500 multifamily units. a couple 100,000 square feet of retail, industrial, just general commercial properties, and also have made a large deployment of capital into historic and adaptive reuse projects where we're utilizing historic tax credits to fill a capital stack that is getting harder and harder to fill every day, which I'm sure you're very much aware of.
Yeah.
So that brings us relatively close to the present day. We've got a portfolio that stretches from Maryland in the north to Florida, mostly the Tampa area in the south. And at times we've been as far west as the West Coast, but right now our westernmost property is in Atlanta, Georgia.
And how do you target the areas that you think are going to be hotter that you want to be doing something in? Is there a way you kind of track that?
Yeah, I mean, it's more art than science in a lot of ways. Certainly we pay attention to the data, but a lot of what we do is you're following jobs, you're following population growth, and you're looking at markets that are relatively developer friendly. Now, typically those don't go hand in hand, right? I mean, Raleigh's a great example of that. Raleigh's really, really hard to get something done in right now. But you fight through that because the demographics are so strong. You're continuing to get the population growth. You're continuing to have graduating students from the 3 major colleges and all the ancillary colleges around. So we still work there. I wish I could say that we could pick places that were both easy to develop in and, great markets, but typically that's kind of doesn't go hand in hand.
Right. Yeah. I think when it's so easy to develop, then it gets overdeveloped, right?
That's right. That's right.
You do like some restrictions to development, so you can, once you get through, somebody's not going to be right down the street
That's
a
right.
year later after you're done.
I think the biggest issue that we're dealing with right now is just lack of clarity, kind of moving of the goalposts, so to speak, and then a staffing issue. I mean, a lot of the municipalities that we're functioning in right now, lost a lot of people during the COVID pandemic that went to the private sector, and they've struggled to fill those positions. And so you kind of empathize with staff because I get it, right? You went from 3 people that were focused on, maybe this one review process to 1 person, and it becomes difficult. The flip side of that is, for as much as we pay in terms of impact fees, entitlements, all that, we would hope that they'd be able to source some additional help. But again, it's a tough employment world right now.
Well, if we can back up a minute, you definitely gave us a whole lot to dig into there. So just slowly going back a little bit. So as you were starting out and then you expanded, starting out and doing Jacksonville and Fayetteville and those areas, were those all self-funded, or were you gaining and getting capital investors that early on? How did that start?
Yeah, so we've been really fortunate to have self-funded the vast majority of what we've done. So of the deals I kind of break things into about 4 phases. We're kind of in the 4th phase of our meaningful development pipeline, so to speak, right now. So that was kind of phase 1, the Jacksonville market. Of the 4 projects we built in that phase, only one of them we went and outsourced some outside capital for, and just more country club equity than anything else, right? Just we had a great site, we knew the demand was there, but our equity was stretched, and so we went out, raised a few $1,000,000 from some friends and family kind of stuff, and so that was my first experience with that, and honestly, the project went well. It delivered on the returns that we promised. But we also realized that you open yourself up to a much different process when you are opening yourself up to outside equity.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, obviously people want visibility of everything that's happening, quarterly updates and et cetera. And then, depending on, if it was extra money or if it was their life savings, how often they're checking on what's going on, especially when you get friends and family involved, makes it a little difficult.
It does.
So sometimes it's easier just dealing with high income individuals that have the extra cash sometimes makes it a little bit of an easier process.
Well, and they're also typically a little bit more savvy, right? They have touched and been in and out of other deals, whether they're, CRE deals or just, sort of just general private equity. They kind of have a little bit better understanding of what to expect. Whereas if you're dealing with the more mom and pop, you may find that you end up doing a lot of explaining, which again is not problematic once you pivot to sort of that understanding. I think the hardest part of that for me was you've kind of got a process, right? You work that process, you've repeated it, you feel really good about it. And then you've really got to kind of switch gears when you switch over to outside capital. And rightfully so, right? I mean, you're taking people's hard-earned money. They're going to expect a certain amount of reporting and a certain amount of diligence. And it takes a little bit of just kind of a mental shift to get comfortable with that.
Yeah. So when you're finding these deals from the beginning and now, what's your primary source? How do you source deals? Do you source them off market through agents? Have you encountered doing mailers? Or how do you find the deals that you're working?
A little bit of everything. I'll tell you, it's getting harder and harder to find stuff off market these days, right? So much of the world has become a little more institutional, and sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. One of the issues we're running into consistently is on brokered land deals, and we're typically buying raw land and going vertical. We do some acquisitions, but for the most part, we like to find unentitled or, not perfectly entitled raw land that we can then work through the entitlement process, add that value, and then execute on our development process. One of the issues we've been running into a lot more recently is, broker deals. They kind of come out and they say, hey, look, we've got this great piece of dirt. It's in, call it South Charlotte. It's a transit oriented development. It's got lots of density and it's got a huge price tag on it. And you start digging into that and you learn that a lot of those entitlements are just what they have sort of coached the landowner on. They haven't actually secured any of those entitlements, yet you're paying a per door price like those entitlements are secured, right? So it's really difficult as a relatively small player, which we are, to take down these broker deals, because I need to buy something at $8,000 a door, do our process, and then the value is 20 a door. I can't come in, buy something at 20 a door, do our process, and then it's worth 21 a door, right? It just doesn't have that. It's not as accretive to the deal. So we typically are sourcing stuff off market through a combination of just a contact network. And that's not to say that we don't end up utilizing brokers a good bit. It's just not typically on listed dirt because again, we find that mismatch doesn't work for us.
Yeah, and that's a lot of what's happening in our market, I know, and some of the surrounding markets is these land deals, they're unentitled land and they're selling them at the price of being fully entitled. So it just completely disregarding the 8 to 10 to 12 months of work that it's going to take to get it fully entitled, not to mention what hiccups you're going to run into. Potentially it doesn't even fully get entitled, but they want you to close prior to entitlement.
Yeah, that's right. Or significant hard money. And again, if I can go directly, if I can go directly to Cameron as the landowner and say, hey, look, here's our process. This is what we're willing to put up as earnest money. When we hit a 6-month hurdle, we'll put up an additional, X dollars in earnest money. And, so long as that's applicable to the sales price, we can get really aggressive with that. What you run into, though, if you're dealing, and I don't mean to throw brokers under the bus by any means here, because I've got great friends and great contacts in the world, but a lot of times what you run into is you kind of play that telephone game a little bit. You're trying to explain something to the broker and then you're not really sure what he's telling Cameron. And then all of a sudden Cameron's getting a little bit skittish, and then they want the money not to be applicable to the sales price, or, they want it all, they need a closing in 9 months. And you've explained pretty clearly, like, there's no chance the entitlements are all there in 9 months. We're going to close this, but I need 12 months. And so that's been a bit of a hurdle for us.
So Something that Cameron and I have discussed a few times is when you're going through this process and you're dealing directly with the owner, it becomes an educational process to the owner as well. A lot of these owners have owned the land. Maybe they've inherited the land. It's been in their family for years and years, and they don't quite understand. Their thought in their head is, okay, I've got this, let's call it 5 acres of land, street value. What I'm seeing stuff trading that is, probably entitled land trading is, $3 million for this piece, right? You're offering me $1.5 million, and you want to hold it for a year and a half while you're going through all of this. Crazy. I don't want to do this. Why would I do that? And they don't understand. So how do you go through that process? What's that like?
Yeah, so I'll tell you the best example of that we deal with regularly, and I probably should have talked a little bit more about how our company is sort of broken down. So Taft Family Ventures is an umbrella organization for 5 different and distinct divisions within the company. They are Taft Management Group, which manages all of our commercial and residential properties, as well as does a little bit of third party management. You've got Taft Development Group that is responsible for sourcing and entitlement of all of our market rate deals, both multifamily and commercial. Then you've got Taft Construction Group. We're real original with the names here, I know, but Taft Construction Group, which is our in-house general contractor, builds all of our multifamily. We typically go third party on other commercial projects, as well as a lot of the adaptive reuse stuff. We'll work with a specialist. Then we've got Taft Mills Group, which is our affordable housing division. And then we've got Taft Family Office, which is where we source the equity for our internal deals So Taft Mills Group is the best example I can think of for your question there. So it's an affordable, we do low income housing tax credits projects, usually less than 100 units is a typical size. And they always, no matter what municipality you're in, are staunchly opposed. Nobody wants affordable housing anywhere near their property. It doesn't matter that we can explain to them, take them to what our properties look like, and to 99% of the population, it looks just like a traditional multifamily project. But it doesn't matter. Affordable housing gets the big X. So those guys have to go in and not only coach landowners in what the process looks like, but also fend off all of the opposition to these projects. And so these guys are really, really good at what they do. And we sort of give them the bandwidth and the leash to do just that. And that process literally starts with sitting with somebody, on their front porch, on their property, and explaining to them step by step what the process looks like, right? That, hey, we're going to need 16 months to get our entitlements done. At the same time, we're running down the debt and tax credit equity process. There's hurdles that you have to hit on the entitlements in order to sort of move to the next step on the capital stack as well. So you can explain to them how they run in parallel. And the goal is for those to coalesce right at the right time, kind of 18 months later on. That to me is the most difficult thing that we do, because again, not only are you asking somebody to sit and be patient while you're working through a process that's really opaque for them, right? You try to explain it to them, but it's not, hell, I don't fully wrap my arms around all of our LIHTC stuff. It takes really sharp guys and gals to do that. So you're asking them to basically trust you. These deals are very much cost constrained. And so it's not as though we can come in and throw big dollars at them to kind of make the concerns go away. You're low earnest money, $25,000 kind of earnest money versus, 6 figures and more when we see on market rate deals. And so it's really about the touch and being open with them, inviting them to every meeting, taking them to existing projects that we have to show them, hey, look, this started with the same conversation with John Smith, 36 months ago. Look where it is now, right? And I think being able to show the physical end product is probably the best tool we have in our arsenal. And on the affordable side, because those deals are pretty much wash, rinse, repeat, we can show that end product to someone and it'll basically look like what their property would look like in, call it, 36 months from that time. A little harder on the market rate because every deal smells a little differently, right? They're not always going to be kind of as cookie cutter as the affordable stuff. But the key to that is you spend a lot of time with the landowner.
Absolutely. Now, one thing when you're doing that is part of your guys' selling point. I know a couple other guys that I work with, part of their selling point on that is, hey, if it doesn't work out and we can't get through entitlement and we've locked up this property for 12 months, we'll give you everything that we have done for the property, which actually creates some value for them regardless. You're spending, they're only giving them 25 or 30,000 or whatever in the beginning, right? You're on top of that spending $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 sometimes getting everything else done, and them understanding how much money you're investing and, saying, hey, well, if it doesn't work, we'll give you this, because obviously it'll benefit you anyway.
That's a great point. Our contracts, and I don't think this was something that we originally had in there. I think this was a end result of a negotiation very much like that. But all of our contracts have, should this deal not close, then buyer will turn over all relevant due diligence to the seller. On these, there's typically not quite as much done, again, as there would be on a market rate, because it's a highly competitive process. So we may throw 6 projects kind of in the hopper, right? Meaning you get them under contract, you start scoring them. It's a prescriptive scoring method. And so you look and see, is it close to a grocery store? Is it, near public transit? And as you sort of start working through that process, things start to fall off and you end up with, maybe 2 that you end up taking to the mat. And so you don't spend quite as much on these in the early stages. Now, when you get to the 2 or maybe 3 that you submit for, I mean, you've got to go essentially full civil plans, right? So you're spending $150,000, roughly on a civil set. We have an in-house architect, and so we're able to, utilize him on a much more, in case he's listening to this, much more efficient basis, and so that's helpful for us in keeping some of those costs down. Versus, on the market rate, you're essentially using a third-party architect and designing a new project every single time.
And Thomas, how about you explain what affordable housing actually is?
I need to go grab one of the experts on it. No, so I'll tell you basically. So affordable housing is a broad term, right? It's everything from government owned and subsidized housing to a couple of units in a luxury high rise that are set aside for folks who make a certain percentage of the area median income, or even as specific as, hey, look, we're going to set aside 8 units for first responders, right? And we're going to make sure that these units are at a rent that works for your firefighters, your teachers, there's people that do veteran specific affordable housing. Our world is basically broken down into 2 separate silos. They're both relative. They're very similar, but one of them's called the 9%, right? A 9% low-income housing tax credit deal is usually going to be a smaller project, less than 100 units. You go to sort of 2 separate capital sources on this. You go to a construction lender, let's just say Bank of America, right? Bank of America will typically come in and they will function as a construction lender, very similar to what you would see on any kind of construction project. But they'll also often come in as the tax credit investor as well, because Bank of America has a large tax liability. We're able to secure, let's say it's a $10 million project. We're able to secure, call it $5 million in tax credits on that they then turn around and purchase from us at a certain, call it 79 cents on the dollar, right? And then they're able to use those tax credits at par, right? So if they buy $5 million in tax credits at 79 cents on the dollar, my math isn't that good, but let's just say they buy them for 4 million. Well, they have 5 million in tax credits now that they're able to apply to their tax bill. And they are also providing the construction debt, so they get the fees, the servicing, all of that along with it. And so it's a nice process when it does work. Typically, these units are based on, again, it's a concept called AMI, area median income, right? And the area median income is determined by the federal government. And what happens is you come in and let's just say we have a 96 unit project. Maybe 30% of those units are for people that make less than 50% of area median income. Another 30% of those units are for people that make less than 80% of area median income. And then the remaining 40% maybe are for people that make 120% or less of area median income. Typically, they're going to be less than 100% in North Carolina because our incomes are fairly low. You start getting in places like Washington, D.C. or, higher income areas. And a lot of times you'll see things at 120% of AMI, which again seems a little odd, right? Because you're like, well, if they're making enough to afford, 120% of area median income, well, why do they need to be subsidized? Well, because the cost of housing is so expensive in these places, that's still a huge discount off of market rate housing. There's also a subset within the LIHTC world that are referred to as bond deals. I'm going to get way out of my element if I start getting too far down that path. But essentially, these are done in a way that allow for larger projects. Usually, these are 180 unit projects, and essentially, you're just able to borrow more money. You're able to get additional tax credits, which are able to increase the size of the deal.
I tell you, this is extremely impressive what you've worked out here. So you got into this, starting out how you got back into doing this. It sounds like this is a great niche that you guys have come into here as a part of your portfolio. And it's very interesting to me. To understand what sets you guys apart is understanding how to put all this together with the tax credits and being able to get the buy-in from each of these different areas as you enter. So now with all your experience, you can step in and, show your portfolio and get there. Could we step back, and do you have any information you could share for somebody that's looking to potentially get into doing something like this on a smaller level? I'm assuming in the beginning, you first had to build your track record of doing this on your own, right? With what you established in Jacksonville and Fayetteville. And once you built that track record, then you leveraged that track record and started going and trying to get into this. Is that right? How it went?
Which is actually backwards from what most people do, because the LIHTC world is typically very equity light for the developer. A lot of our competitors either focus exclusively on the LIHTC world, or they started in the LIHTC world, built up that resume, built up that track record, built up that portfolio, and then you move into the more equity heavy market rate stuff. So we actually did it backwards. And a lot of that, I've got to give credit to my father, Tom Sr. He saw this as both a mission-driven vertical for us, as well as a profit model. Not only is it providing safe, affordable, convenient housing for a subset of our population that desperately needs it, it also is it's a scale game, right? On 2 projects, your cash flow, it's not, if that was your income, you'd be living in one of these affordable housing projects, because the cash flow from these is not substantial, right? You're talking in the tens of thousands of dollars annually, because there's just not a lot of income. You still got to service the debt. You still have the expenses, just like in a regular deal. The key is getting scale, right? So at this time, we've got 9 projects that are completed, stabilized, and have permanent debt on them. We've got another 11 that are funded and either under construction or, very close to breaking ground. To your point on developing that track record, we went out, or you asked the question, how you kind of get started in it. You really need to work in a shop that specializes in this model in order to figure that out. You sort of need to be a known quantity. You need to understand that world. And I'm not saying you have to spend 20 years doing it, but you need to spend substantial time. So we went out and we got really lucky. There's a local guy that was working for one of the large national tax credit developers, was a little kind of burned out on that, knew that eventually he wanted to do his own thing, but wasn't in a place that he was able to necessarily bring the bandwidth or more importantly, the construction guarantees to the table. So Tom and he developed a good relationship. We brought him on in 2014. And it's somebody you guys ought to, I'll make an introduction after this is over. It's somebody you ought to spend a little time with, whether it's on a podcast or just getting to know, because they're really, I call them kind of the smartest guys in our shop. And it's really an interesting world. But yeah, so we basically went out and kind of bought somebody that was a player in that world, brought him in. He ends up with some ownership in the company as well, and the Taft Mills Group specifically, and has just been going gangbusters ever since. We started in North Carolina, a project in Greenville in 2015, and now we're in North Carolina, Virginia, and Maryland, and we're going to get to Ohio and Georgia and potentially South Carolina within the next 2 years. So it really is a scale game. Once you get those units, you're able to start managing them, and all of a sudden, the couple of $1,000s or $10,000 from each project does start to become real money.
Absolutely.
Well, man, I tell you, I feel like we could spend hours with you here. There's just so many different rabbit holes we could go down, but we've spent about 35 minutes here on your time. So I do really appreciate it. And gosh, we'll probably have to have you back on a bit later on just to kind of fill in the gaps from here.
Well,
Yeah.
I'd love to do it. I look, I like talking about this. It's, I don't have a ton of passions in my life, but real estate is absolutely one of them. And so I'd be happy to chat more, and maybe, we've got some specific projects that you could spend 35 minutes on very easily, whether it's in the adaptive reuse, historic stuff that we've really begun doing a lot of, which mirrors it's historic tax credits versus low income tax credits. As well as I've been working on a project actually down in y'all's neck of the woods, that if we can ever get past a particularly demanding town council, it would be something that I'd love to share more about that process and sort of how we go about it.
Thomas, that's fantastic. So a couple of things we'd like to do. One, if somebody wanted to reach out to you and find out more about what you're doing or just connect with you, what's the best way for someone to reach you?
Yeah, all our contact information is on our website. Website is taftfamilyventures.com.
Keeps it easy.
Yeah, I try. Yeah, we tried to buy Taft.com, but guy wouldn't be reasonable about it.
Oh man, well, that's fantastic. Well, again, thanks so much for joining us today and telling us a bit about your company. Is very impressive, and we'd love to get you back on and find out more. Yeah, I think the tax credit thing is a different avenue that not everyone can stomach because it's very difficult. So you to be able to specialize in that, it takes a lot of work and specialists to get there. And so obviously you guys are doing a great job, and that actually is very helpful to all communities around, because exactly what you said is right. I mean, the affordable housing is so difficult right now, especially with the cost of everything. So, it leaves so many people out. You really need something to make housing available for the general population at this point, right?
That's right. Well, it's also nice to see government actually work sometimes, right? And this is really a program that really works. And our current administration has made a big push to kind of make it even more robust. And look, I'm not a proponent of a lot of things that a lot of our leaders do. And but it is cool to occasionally see something that does work. And I really hope that these types of conversations are eye-opening to folks who maybe don't know much about it, or maybe resistant to it because it sort of has a bad rap.
Yeah. Awesome. Thomas, thank you so much again. We appreciate it, and we'll try and get back with you as soon as we can get you back on.
And love
Thanks
to do
so
it.
much for
I'm
your
happy
time.
to do it down to the coast too, but maybe on a week that doesn't rain every day like this
Yeah.
one.
It's not going to be the best week here. Yeah.
This is not the good week.
Thomas, thanks so much, buddy.
All right,
Cheers,
Ben.
guys.
Have a great day, sir. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Carolina Commercial Real Estate Connection. You're officially one step closer to conquering the market. Be sure to subscribe wherever you heard this podcast so you never miss a future episode. For more information or to connect with Tony and Cameron, check them out online at www.timelessci.com. We'll see you next time.